Our story begins within the walls of a long-abandoned factory. A crowd of people with unkind smiles on their faces watched the guy hanging by his arms. Sam tried not to look down, where there were many zombies in the cage below him, looking up at him from time to time with their predatory eyes. Victoria took a confident step forward, not taking her eyes off the suspended guy. She said that all his friends were already dead, and asked what the meaning of his life was now. At her words, Sam remembered with pain in his heart his fallen comrades, with whom he had gone through many difficulties. The hero blamed himself for their deaths, and this guilt killed him from the inside. Turning his angry gaze to the girl, he shouted that she deserved the most miserable death. At that very moment, she pressed herself against Pavel, who was standing next to her, and, with feigned fear in her voice, said that Sam was being rude to her again. The man smiled broadly and said that he would make his death slow in order to appease her anger. Afterwards, he looked at Sam and, taking out the remote control, thanked him for the supplies, thanks to which they would be able to live peacefully for several months. As soon as he pressed the button, our hero fell into a cage full of zombies. They immediately rushed towards him with zeal. The tied-up Sam didn't have time to do anything before the zombies' teeth, which were all around him, sank into his body. Gritting his teeth against the pain that was tearing him apart, the hero swore to himself with tears in his eyes that if he had another chance, he would make everyone pay for it. Suddenly he opened his eyes wide and jumped up in place, as if waking up from a terrible dream. The hero looked in bewilderment at the girl standing in front of him, who demanded an explanation from him about why her name was not on the property documents. Ignoring her words, he turned around frantically, Sam trying to figure out what was going on, when suddenly the realization flashed through his mind that he had returned to the time before the apocalypse. He looked at his involuntarily clenched fist with regret on his face, remembering how he had been cruelly deceived, his parents' inheritance stolen, and thrown out into the street. And soon the whole world plunged into real chaos. People began to turn into monsters, into zombies. But he was lucky to find new friends, with whom Sam created a safe haven and was able to survive. He also remembered that fateful day when Victoria came to them and pressed on their pity, forcing them to take her in. In fact, it was just a trick set up by the enemies. Under the cover of night, she led a car with strangers into the territory of the shelter. This was their end. Coming out of his memories, he cast a hateful glance at the girl standing in front of him. Dissatisfied, Victoria reminded him once again that he should prepare for their engagement. When he saw her, the guy was overwhelmed with negative emotions, which he tried his best to keep under control and not lose his temper. Instead, he simply threw the girl out the door of his house. Victoria looked in bewilderment at the door that slammed loudly behind her. Without taking his eyes off the door, Sam sighed loudly, pulling himself together. Then he glanced sideways at the electronic dial standing on the nightstand. Looking at the date, he realized he had only 1 month left to prepare for the disaster. Suddenly, something else caught his attention. A window with a system task appeared in front of him, which consisted of preparing for a disaster. To complete it, it was necessary to prepare a plot of land and supplies for a year. As a reward for completing it, 10 points were promised, which could be exchanged later. Having carefully studied the information, the hero went to the system store, where useful things could be purchased for various amounts of points. The presence of such a thing made Sam very happy. The conditions of the task reminded him of one thing. In his past life, he had to constantly go hungry in order to save money for his wedding with Victoria. But in this life, such a need had disappeared. Approaching the table, he picked up the phone lying there, after which he opened a food delivery app, deciding that since zombies were going to appear in a month, he should take advantage of the opportunity to try as much delicious food as possible. His order was only delivered in the evening, when the sun had already set below the horizon. Our hero's entire table was littered with various dishes from a high-class restaurant. Sam took a piece of sweet and sour pork and was amazed at how delicious food could look. As soon as he carefully placed this piece in his mouth, he was instantly filled with a previously unknown, delightful feeling of bliss. The hero began to actively consume one dish after another. Suddenly, while he was dealing with the crab, he was distracted by the phone ringing. Looking at the screen, Sam saw that a close friend of his, now ex-fiancé, was calling him. A loud, indignant voice of a girl was heard in the room as soon as the hero answered the call. The hero did not plan to fall for their trick twice, so he rudely interrupted Alexa, telling her everything he thought about her and her precious friend. Afterwards, he dropped the call, without even listening to what the stunned girl wanted to add. He sighed heavily and leaned back on the sofa, throwing his head back. Now his thoughts were focused on his future refuge. Sam planned to build the strongest fortress that would be easy to defend. There should also be a source of water and a forest nearby. With these thoughts, he headed to the real estate center. Almost immediately at the entrance, A female employee met him, and bowing low, asked whether he wanted to buy or rent a house. When the hero was about to answer, a man suddenly approached and called out to the girl. Without paying any attention to the hero, he ordered her to go to the warehouse and help with the boxes there. Sophia turned slightly, looking at him, and replied that she had a client now, and she could not do this. Justin roughly turned the girl in the right direction, and repeated his request more insistently. In response to her objections, he said, looking at Sam, that such a loser would not be able to buy a toilet, let alone an apartment, so there was no point in her wasting her time on him. The hero's dissatisfied question about whether he was too arrogant, since he looked down on other people, offended the man. With a mocking voice, Justin replied that now in front of him was only a pathetic mongrel, but not a human, and if Sam could at least buy a toilet, then he would eat shit on stream. The hero frowned, remembering the man's words. Smiling unkindly, he advised him to start preparing. Having said this, he proudly raised his head and taking out a map, said that he did not come here to rent or buy a house. His goal was completely different. To buy land. Such a statement greatly surprised both employees. The other buyers present were also astonished by his words, and began to cast puzzled glances at him, wondering if he was all right in the head, since the prices for land here were simply sky high. Sophia quickly regained control of her emotions, and maintaining her previous politeness, asked Sam to follow her. Justin glanced sideways at the departing guy with displeasure. Having escorted our hero to the work area, the girl provided him with all the available information about the prices of available land. He replied that he wouldn't need it. He would simply list his conditions, and Sophia would say if they had anything suitable. The worker agreed to this, after which Sam put his finger on his chin and thoughtfully said that he needed land near mountains and rivers. There should also be a running source of water, a convenient transportation hub, and some large building nearby. The girl thought hard, going over all the possible options in her mind. Justin, who was standing nearby, came to her aid and said that there was a suitable plot of land in the Beijing area. Sophia immediately understood what land he was talking about and objected, saying that they could not sell it because there were many unfinished factories there. The man chuckled and mockingly said that there was no talk of any sale. Sam was deliberately making such strange demands because he was not going to buy anything. Our hero completely ignored the worker's attack and, turning to the girl, asked if this area suited his requirements, to which the girl, with a bit of hesitation, answered that it did. Having received the documents for this land, he carefully looked through them, making sure that this was indeed a suitable place for his plans, and since there was an abandoned building there, it would save him money and time on construction. He handed the documents back to Sophia, saying that he was taking the land and was ready to pay for it immediately. Hearing this, the girl looked at him with genuine surprise. She carefully asked him if he was sure that he really wanted to buy this land. He nodded, and asked that they finish the paperwork as quickly as possible. Such confidence of the guy made Justin very wary. A few moments later, he had in his hands a check confirming payment for the land Sam had chosen. He was truly indignant and perplexed. The man believed that one would have to be truly crazy to spend such a huge amount of money on a site with an unfinished factory. With a mocking grin on his face, Sam approached him and reminded him of the words he had said earlier, and promised to buy a paid subscription to Justin's channel to see his brilliant debut. Visitors who witnessed the scene pounced on the man, cameras in hand, urging him to follow through on his words. The hero left the building, thinking that almost all the money for the bride's ransom had gone to the land. Now he needed to think about supplies. Lost in his thoughts, he did not notice a man passing by, who, unlike him, paid attention to him, and, recognizing him, glanced sideways at Sam in bewilderment. As soon as he approached the entrance to the building, he froze, amazed by what was happening inside. Justin was forced to the floor and forced to eat someone's shit with his mouth open. Victoria decided to dedicate this day to herself, and now she was finishing painting her nails. Suddenly, the mobile phone lying nearby rang. The girl answered the call and asked cheerfully if her fiancé had not forgotten about her yet. In response, an excited voice of a man was heard on the other side, who said that Sam was in a real estate company and bought land. Hearing this, Victoria jumped up from her seat and asked in bewilderment where he got such money. When she discovered that the bride price money had been spent on this, Victoria was furious that Sam had dared to spend her money. Meanwhile, the hero had already managed to return home, and was now thinking about where he could get more money to build the base. He was distracted from his thoughts by a loud knock on the door, which left the guy confused. Getting up from the sofa, he went to the door and opened it. On the other side was an enraged Victoria with her friend. The first immediately pounced on him with a question about how he could have spent her money. The question addressed to him caused Sam's confusion, which was immediately reflected on his face. and he asked what kind of nonsense she was talking. She shouted that he bought the land with the bride price money, and since it was her money, it meant that this land now belonged to her. With the same bewilderment, the hero asked if she had gone crazy. He pulled out a wad of dollar bills and hit her on the shoulder with them, saying that he had a lot of money, but she wouldn't get a penny, which he could also pass on to his friend Pavel. Victoria hesitated, completely unable to understand how he knew about her affair on the side. At this point, Alexa intervened, advising them both to calm down, as this was just a misunderstanding between the couple. In response, Sam shouted that there was no misunderstanding, and Victoria was no longer his girlfriend. Having said this, he slammed the door right in front of them. Standing by the elevator, Alexa asked her friend why she hadn't told her earlier that she was dating that old man Pavel. When she replied that they had just rented a room a couple of times, the girl sighed heavily, and clutching her head, said that everything had gotten out of control, so she suggested that they go back and think about what to do next. With these words, the elevator that had arrived opened. Victoria was the first to go inside, so she couldn't see the malicious smile that appeared on her friend's face. Without wasting any time, Sam set off for the land he had purchased the very next day. Having found a team of builders, he asked how long it would take to repair the factory. Leon replied that the amount of work here was very large, strengthening the walls, installing watchtowers, barbed wire, blast-proof doors, and bulletproof windows. Suddenly, an idea struck him, which he voiced, asking Sam if he was preparing for war. He simply said that they needed to finish everything in a month, and asked him to voice the required amount. The announced deadlines surprised the man. Smiling awkwardly, he said that in that case it would require a lot of money. The hero, without a moment's hesitation, repeated his request to name the price, holding up 2 fingers in front of him. The man replied that they would have to work at full speed and would need at least that much. Sam chuckled and asked if he really wanted 20 million. The builder nodded and added that another 5 million in advance, and then they could start. The hero sighed and replied that he would transfer the entire amount within a week, so they could begin, which surprised the builder Pak. Noticing his reaction, Sam patted him on the shoulder and said that if the payment was not received, then they could take the land for themselves. The man had nothing to say in response. Suddenly, a joyful Alexa called out to our hero, pressing herself against him. She asked what he was doing there, which puzzled the guy. Sam was not at all happy about her appearance here, because he knew that it was she who incited Ksenia to deceive him in her past life. He was determined to make her pay double, but distracted from his thoughts, the hero asked with displeasure what she was doing here. Alexa ignored his question and, still smiling, asked if he wanted to build a villa here. The hero brushed the girl off, saying that it was none of her business. Alexa didn't understand why he was acting like this, because Sam was a typical loser, and before it was enough for just one touch to make him embarrassed. Instantly forgetting about its existence, our hero headed towards the builders, shouting to them that the gates should be wider. The girl clenched her fists in irritation, but even so, she did not intend to miss her chance and take advantage of her quarrel with Victoria. A little later, Sam returned back to his place and laid out 2 leaflets in front of him. Although he mortgaged the house, he only received 3 million, which was not enough even for the first stage of construction, so he decided to try to sell the house several times. Sam wanted to take advantage of the fact that since the apocalypse was coming soon, no matter how many times he sold the house, it wouldn't matter. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted again by a knock at the door. From the voice on the other side, he realized that it was a neighbor who had quite a lot of money. Besides, he owned the entire 1st and 2nd floors of this house, and now he wanted to buy the 3rd from him. When he opened the door, the old man immediately pounced on him with accusations that Sam had been hanging out at clubs all night again. In response, he shouted that he had gone to bed before 10 in the evening, and there was no talk of any clubs. But the man did not believe it, and wanted to present evidence. Realizing this, the hero sighed wearily, and said that he was tired of this, so he was selling this apartment. What he heard greatly pleased the old man, and leaning forward a little, he asked with hope in his voice if it was true. The hero replied that he would indeed sell it, but on one condition. After which he said that his new house would be under construction for another 6 months, so he would stay here during that time. Sam set the advance payment at 5 million, since he needed to pay off the loan for the construction. The old man hesitated to answer, thinking about what he had heard. Noticing this, the hero said that if he didn't want to, he could forget about it and close the door. He reacted instantly. He said that he agreed to these conditions, but they had to sign a contract, which the hero agreed to. As soon as the old man returned to his place, a smile blossomed on Sam's face. By the evening, 5 million had been transferred to his account, so now the hero had 8 million at his disposal. so he decided it was time to complete his first task and get his reward. The very next morning, Sam went to the mall. He wandered through the supermarket, collecting supplies for the year. The other customers kept giving him strange looks the whole time. In just 40 minutes, the hero managed to fill a couple dozen carts with groceries. Seeing this, some people mocked him, saying that he was one of those idiots who believed in stories about the end of the world. Once the required amount of supplies had been collected, a message appeared in front of Sam stating that the disaster preparation task had been completed, and he had now received a reward of 10 points. The hero immediately opened the system store, and without a drop of doubt, he decided to buy the protagonist box, which cost 10 points, because it seemed to him the most necessary thing at the initial stage. As soon as Sam bought it, a box immediately materialized in front of him. From there he received a ring of first-level space, inside which time stopped, and the volume of the contained space was equal to 500. The thing that fell to him made our hero very happy. He could not believe his luck, that fortune would smile on him so suddenly. The thought that since time stopped inside, the food would always remain fresh brought a smile to his face. A man accompanied by 2 security guards came out to the crowd and asked with displeasure what was going on here. When he saw Sam, he was surprised to recognize him. The hero also recognized the man. He remembered that in high school they were classmates. Douglas always bullied the weak, and at that time they often had squabbles with each other. Suddenly, pointing at Sam, the man shouted at him to put all the goods back in place. The hero chuckled and said that Douglas was not very hospitable to his store's customers. These words irritated the man even more, and he shouted that Sam should pay for everything immediately in that case. Otherwise, he would regret it. It took the poor sellers an entire hour to ring up all the goods they had collected. When all the products were finally scanned, Douglas came up and asked how much it totaled. The girl looked at the punched-out check and replied that it would all cost 56,803 yuan. Hearing this, Douglas grabbed the payment terminal and held it in front of Sam, demanding that he pay immediately. Without a word, he took out a card and swiped it across the terminal. When the device reported a successful payment, Douglas was confused. He handed the terminal back and waved to the guards as he headed away, but was stopped by Sam's scream. The man turned around and asked with displeasure what he wanted. The hero smiled and demanded an apology for the rudeness shown to him, or Douglas would take all these goods back to the shelves himself. Douglas shouted in irritation that Sam should not look for trouble. At this point, other shop visitors intervened, shouting angrily that Douglas had attacked the guy himself and that he should apologize. Someone even started recording everything that was happening on camera. The hero smiled wider and said that if Douglas asked for forgiveness, then he would become kinder and buy 10 times more. To prove his words, he put the card in front of him and asked to give him the terminal to show the balance. The man immediately complied with this request. His eyebrows rose in surprise when he saw the amount displayed on the terminal. Still with the same smile, the hero repeated his request for an apology. Douglas clenched his teeth until they creaked, after which he bowed low and loudly uttered his apologies. Sam came closer to him and, putting his hand on his head, said with emphasis that next time the man should control himself. Having swallowed these words, Douglas, with feigned politeness, asked why he needed such supplies, to which the hero replied that he was simply preparing a big deal. Hearing this, the man said that the store's stock was insufficient for this, and it would be better to turn to wholesalers. Thomas stopped and looked back, asking if Douglas knew any of them. He nodded, and naming one of their former classmates, said that he had just such a business. At Sam's behest, he contacted Sean and told him that he had found a major client for him. A couple of hours later, Douglas delivered our hero to the agreed meeting place. Suddenly, the sound of an approaching car was heard behind them. The car stopped a few centimeters away from them. Fearing for his life, Douglas jumped to the side, but Sam remained standing in place. His face showed clear displeasure at how dangerously this man was driving. A few moments later, a man came out from there, lighting a cigarette. Then he headed towards our hero, asking if he was that big client. Douglas happily told him that they had gone to high school together. Taking another drag, the man said that now he finally remembered that same stubborn boy. Sam just winced in displeasure as cigarette smoke was blown into his face. A smile played on Sean's lips. Approaching the hero, he touched one of the laces on the bike, examined it critically, and asked if Sam was really wearing fakes. When he replied that he had no idea, because he had bought the bike at a regular street stall, the man lost his temper, grabbed Douglas by the head and shouted angrily that he had only wasted his time because of him and his fake big client. Continuing to take his anger out on him, Sean continued to shout that he had been in this business for years and could spot a man with money just by looking at him. Sam, standing to the side, chuckled and said that for an uneducated man with such a nasty character, he had too much self-esteem. Hearing this, Sean switched from Douglas to him, grabbing him by the chest, and asked irritably what Sam just said. He said with the same grin that Sean shouldn't look down on others. But the man didn't pay attention to this, asking with emphasis who Sam dared to call uneducated here. The hero didn't think that this fact would affect the man so much. Before he could make another remark, Douglas intervened, asking that they not start a fight here, and then adding that Sean really was uneducated, which was why he was offended. The reaction to these words was not long in coming. With a half-turn, Sean hit him in the stomach, shouting at him not to interfere where he was not wanted. After that, he turned his attention back to Sam, and said in a threatening voice that if he didn't buy a truckload of goods from him, he would crawl back on all fours. The hero took his phone out of his pocket and calmly told Sean to tell him the account number and stop tugging at his collar. A few minutes later, he transferred the required amount to the man's account, leaving him in great shock. Sam transferred him $1 million in advance, after which he added that he would buy goods for $5 million and pay the rest when the goods were delivered. Sean looked up from his phone and asked what the hero needed, and he listed that he needed cereals, snacks, drinks, and anything else that he wouldn't have to check often. The man smiled contentedly and asked the boy to follow him. He was happy with his luck, because he just had a batch of goods left, which was about to expire. A little later, the three of them moved to the warehouse, where Sean said that if Sam took all of this, he would give him a 10% discount. The hero replied that before deciding anything he had to check the quality of the goods. Approaching the boxes, he took one of the packages lying there. Turning slightly, he looked at Sean and said that although the packaging was in order, the inside was practically rotten. The man hoped until the very end that Sam didn't understand this. Putting on a crooked smile, he said that he would give a 50% discount. But the hero didn't fall for this trick, and replied that he spends $5 million only on the highest quality products. Sean gritted his teeth in dissatisfaction. He thought his plan had failed, so when Sam said he would take the rotten stuff, the man's face showed confusion. Noticing this, the hero explained that he agreed to 50%, but on one condition: he would pay in a month. Sean, still confused, asked if he would really buy it even if the food spoiled by then, to which Sam replied that he could take his house if he cheated. Trying to understand his motives, the man suggested that our hero was supplying the distribution channel. He patted him on the shoulder, and with a cheerful voice replied that after some time, even expired products would be worth their weight in gold. Hearing this, Sean became wary and asked what Sam meant. The hero shook his head, telling the man to simply deliver the goods and that the address would be sent to him a little later. When an unfamiliar number called him, the hero answered and asked who it was, and on the other side an excited voice was heard asking if he was the one selling the house. Sam interrupted his telephone conversation and turned to the men standing nearby, saying that he had to go and advised them to quickly resolve the issue with the food. After that he left the warehouse. As soon as Sam returned home, an old man with a bag of money came to him and said that he agreed to give him 3 months to leave, and asked him to sign a contract. The hero was alarmed by how quickly this old man agreed, and was ready to immediately pay such an impressive sum. Sam carefully asked him where he was going in such a hurry. Tim replied that his granddaughter was going to change schools, so she would have nowhere to live. Having walked around the entire area, he found out that only Sam was selling a house here. After listening to him, the hero said that he was too honest, laid out all the information on a platter, and asked if the old man was afraid that he would raise the price. Tim was horrified, and with a pleading voice, asked him not to do this, because this was all his savings for 2 generations. Sam reassured him that the deal was still in place, but he should be more careful in the future. Taking the prepared contract from his hands, Sam signed it. Seeing the signed papers, Tim breathed a sigh of relief, happy that his problem was finally solved. Afterwards, he bowed gratefully to Sam and apologized for distracting him from his work. An incomprehensible feeling did not give our hero any peace. He understood perfectly well that the granddaughter of such a kind and honest man would not last even a week after the start of the disaster. When Tim was about to leave, he called out to him and asked him to leave his current address. A couple of days later, he returned to the counter where he was met by the builder Pak. The man immediately inquired about further payment. The hero replied that he was just about to transfer and asked how the construction was progressing. He led the guy inside, saying that everything was 70% ready, and asked him to pay attention to the walls and doors, which were an ideal defense. When Sam asked what was going on with the warehouse, the man replied that it was already ready for use. The hero was delighted by this news, and without delay he dialed Sean's number and said that he could bring supplies. A couple of hours later, active work was underway at the warehouse to unload goods. Sam carefully directed the process, giving directions on which products to put where. The tired workers left the warehouse only late at night, finally finishing their work. The hero remained inside, once again looking around the completely packed warehouse. His second task of stocking up on supplies for 10 years ahead was completed, and he received 20 points as a reward for it. When Sam entered the system store, he saw that a new box had appeared there. He now had access to a physical enhancement potion, a supply box, and a skill awakening box that he didn't have before. By spending 10 points, the hero acquired a skill box, from which he received the first level Mind's Eye ability, with which he could detect the target's hostility. Sam smiled contentedly, as this ability would be one of the most useful, especially in the early stages of a disaster. Almost immediately, the system gave him a new task to prepare for battle, after reading which the hero was inspired, because this was exactly what he expected from the very beginning. That same night, our hero went to the black market. He walked down a long street full of people wanting to buy forbidden things. Suddenly, Sam heard a familiar voice that caught his attention. A little further away from him, a dissatisfied Pavel tried to bring down the price of the goods by bargaining. Noticing the man standing at the stall selling fake bracelets, Sam thought that Victoria was indeed too easily fooled by such junk. Quickly losing interest, he glanced at the other stalls and finally found what he needed. Several people gathered at the weapons stall, carefully examining the merchandise. A smile immediately blossomed on Sam's face. He was already afraid that he wouldn't find this stall. Coming closer, he selected one of the blades and asked the owner if he had anything hard. He replied that these were the sharpest knives, and if he wanted something hard, he should buy the blank and sharpen it himself, then threw him a piece of the whetstone, suggesting that he try it first. The hero frowned and said that it was not the hardest. The shop owner also frowned and asked with displeasure if Sam was looking for trouble. Suddenly, he received a notification on his phone that 200,000 yuan had been credited to his account. Smiling, the hero showed him the screen of his phone and said that he really wanted to buy something. Peter called out to his assistant and asked him to watch him behind the counter for a couple of minutes. Afterwards, he rose from his seat and suggested going to a more secluded place to discuss everything. Thus, they entered a small house standing nearby. There, Peter presented Sam with a homemade gun that was strong enough to shoot a chicken, and it also came with cheap steel pellets. When the hero refused this weapon without even listening to him, displeasure flashed across the man's face. In a serious voice, he explained that it was almost a complete copy of the revolver, which was not inferior to the original, and he was ready to give it away for 5,000 yuan. Thomas said threateningly that he had given 200,000 in advance and asked if there was anything more suitable for him here. Hearing the words about prepayment, Peter asked in surprise what that meant. The hero said with all seriousness that he needed weapons worth 2 million. Peter rubbed his chin uncertainly and asked why Sam had come here for an order of such a level. Sighing, the hero said that before, such trivial matters were handled by subordinates, but now everything has changed a little. Hearing him, Peter asked to wait a few moments and headed towards the door. He checked that there was no one outside and clicked the door lock. Afterwards, he turned off the light and carefully moved to the window, drawing the curtains and checking the surroundings for extra ears. Having made sure of everything, the man looked at Sam and said that he had come to the right place. He approached the hero and whispered that he should write him a list with everything he needed and come tomorrow with cash at midnight to close the deal. As soon as their conversation was over, Peter saw off his dear client, Sam. As soon as he had taken a couple of steps away from the house, he was called out. Behind him was Pavel, who said with a grin on his face that he didn't expect to meet him at the black market. Approaching him, he asked with a mocking voice if Sam really wanted to imitate people who sell all their things in order to live a little in comfort. The hero didn't answer him. A thought suddenly appeared in his head that this was a great opportunity to test his skill. As soon as he mentally pronounced the name, the ability immediately activated. Sam looked from Pavel to Peter standing behind him. Seeing a green smiley face above his head, he realized that the man did not pose a threat to him. Then he returned his attention to his old acquaintance and, pointing to the bag in his hand, asked with undisguised mockery whether he really hoped to deceive Victoria with such trash, although it was quite logical to give trash to trash. The words he said instantly aroused rage in the man. At that moment, Peter approached Sam and, nodding towards Pavel, asked if everything was okay, to which the hero replied that it was just his old enemy. This was enough for Peter to draw certain conclusions, and calling his guys, he said that they would deal with him, and Sam had nothing to worry about. The hero threw them a last word so that they would not kill Pavel, because he still had some plans for him. Taking his request into consideration, Peter and his friends moved towards the puzzled man. Noticing the weapons in their hands, he became seriously scared, and suggested resolving everything peacefully. But his pleas were ignored, and several long minutes later Peter threw the beaten man to the ground. Having experienced such humiliation, Pavel vowed to take revenge on Sam. 2 days later, late at night, a truck drove into our hero's warehouse. All the weapons he ordered were delivered. In this way, he managed to complete the task of preparing for the battle. As a bonus reward, the hero received a potion of physical strengthening, which could not but please. As the syringe containing the potion materialized in his palm, Sam realized that it was worth 2 points, which was comparable to 2 potions from the store. Rolling up his sleeve, he raised the syringe over his head with all his determination. As soon as the needle was inserted into his skin, the hero gritted his teeth in pain. He felt how his body began to change almost immediately. But a few moments later, it all passed, and Sam received a message that his physical strength had been increased by 2 points. Immediately after that, he went to the system store, where he only had access to a physical strengthening potion and a supply box. Deciding to use the opportunity given to him to the limit, he bought another potion. Thus, 20 minutes later, he reached 8 points of physical strength, which was about 60% of the possible. He decided to test his new power. Looking around, he noticed a couple of metal beams and bags near one of the walls. Coming closer, the hero took one of the rods lying there. Then, swinging one leg, he struck. The rod bent, broke, and flew off to the side. When it collided with the wall, a deep crack appeared in it. Having finished testing his powers, the hero decided to move the weapon to the ring, because it would be much safer to store it there. With these thoughts, he pointed the ring at the boxes of weapons, and they immediately began to be drawn inside. A few moments later, everything was over, and the hero looked around, deciding what to do, because after tomorrow a catastrophe was supposed to happen. Suddenly, a memory of Tim and his granddaughter came into his mind. Sam closed his eyes, trying to push him out of his thoughts. He sighed and ran his hand over his face, thinking that even after everything he had been through and been reborn, it was hard for him to ignore people in trouble. With the thought that he should send the old man the bare minimum necessary for survival, and what happens to them next is no longer his concern. The next day, Sam took the car and went to see old Tim. Once outside, he looked around, thinking that he would never have found such a hole without a navigator. While he was climbing up to the right floor, he realized that the old man really didn't live well, since he lived in such a place, and on the top floor at that. As soon as he stopped at the door he needed, he knocked several times. Coming to his senses, Sam put on the ring, deciding that he had better get supplies now, otherwise it would be very difficult to explain everything later. A moment later, the ring emitted a bright glow. A couple dozen boxes of supplies materialized right in front of him. Footsteps approaching could be heard on the other side of the door. Opening the door, the old man said that he promised to pay the rent next week. However, as soon as he saw Sam in front of him, his eyes widened in surprise. Noticing a lot of boxes behind him, he asked what they were all about. The hero said that he would explain everything later, and asked the old man to help him drag the boxes inside. Sometime later, all these boxes were moved to Tim's apartment. Before saying anything, Sam looked around, saying that he had very good, strong doors. After which he told the old man to listen carefully and remember his words, that he should use these supplies wisely. Then he would be able to last for 6 months. Suddenly, one photo caught his attention, and he broke off mid-sentence. Tim, who didn't understand anything, said that Sam could have kept all of it, since they were moving in a month anyway. This photo showed an old man with his granddaughter. The hero could not help but recognize in this girl his friend who died in a past life. Taking the photo, he asked Tim if his granddaughter's name was Charlotte. Hearing this, the old man asked in surprise how he knew this. Having confirmed his guesses, Sam asked where she was now. The old man replied that she was still at her old school. They were going to transfer after the move. At that moment, a memory came to his mind of how much Charlotte had mourned the death of her grandfather, for which she blamed herself entirely. In a past life, Tim went to a destroyed school to save his granddaughter and died. Putting the photo back in place, Sam promised that he would not allow this to happen in this life. Then he turned to the old man and said that they were not moving to a new house, which puzzled him. Ahead of the barrage of questions, the hero hurried to explain to him that tomorrow this world would turn into hell, and neither his home nor Charlotte's transfer to a new school would be important anymore. So now they would go together after her, and then to a new safe place. The information he heard puzzled the old man, and he asked what it all meant. The hero suppressed his irritation, trying to figure out how to explain everything clearly to Tim. He sighed, put on his ring, and asked Tim if he knew what a great famine was, and if he could imagine how terrible and tragic life would be when famine came. Tim asked in confusion where hunger would come from now. However, the old man did not hear the answer to his question, because the next moment the space in front of them began to rapidly distort. When everything stopped, all the boxes in the room disappeared at once. The amazed Tip looked around and asked where all the boxes had gone. The hero, who activated his ability, replied that he had the superpower of seeing the future. so if Tim wanted to survive and save his granddaughter, he had better listen to him. After that, Sam asked where Charlotte's school was. As soon as he found out the address, he immediately got into the car with the still perplexed old man. They arrived at school only in the evening. As soon as the car stopped, our heroes quickly got out, and Sam asked the old man if he knew the class and location of his granddaughter's dormitory. Meanwhile, a fight was brewing among students near one of the dormitories. Clarice stepped forward and hit Charlotte with a backhand, shouting that she had no idea what Alexander could see in her. Looking at her, Charlotte replied that it was not her initiative. Alexander himself insisted. At this point, another girl, Camilla, intervened and kicked her opponent in the stomach. Clarice, who had dropped down next to Charlotte, grabbed her by the hair, telling her that she shouldn't lie to their faces. Suddenly they were interrupted by someone's displeased cry. Tim and Sam ran as fast as they could to help the girl. Pointing at Clarissa, the old man shouted at her to immediately let go of his granddaughter. But of course, no one listened to him. Instead, a trio of hooligans blocked his path, saying that the youth would sort out their own problems. Tim rushed at the guy standing in front of him, clutching his bike, and asked in bewilderment what their parents were looking at, to raise such bastards. At that very moment, one of the guys from this gang swung a bat at the old man, but Sam couldn't let something like that happen. Stopping the boy with one hand, he asked with disdain if he really wanted to become a killer at such an early age. All the other hooligans' attention immediately turned to him. Deciding not to waste time, the hero took out the guy standing in front of him with one kick. He instantly flew 10 meters to the side. Seeing this scene, the remaining two hooligans became wary when they realized that their opponent was not just some vagabond. Having agreed, they went around Sam from both sides. The first to attack was the one who came from behind, rushing at the hero with a bat. All he had to do to dodge this attack was to crouch. The hero immediately noticed that along with his strength, his reaction speed also increased. Rising to his feet, he grabbed the guy by the scruff of the neck. Then, with one sharp movement, he threw it over his back. From the strong impact with the ground, he immediately lost consciousness. At that very moment, the last hooligan rushed at Sam with a knife. The hero turned to face his opponent and easily pushed the guy's hand aside. Then he raised his leg to strike, and aiming at the opponent's kneecap, he delivered a sharp blow there, knocking the hooligan off his feet. Having hit the ground, he also instantly lost consciousness. Thus, all the hooligans who attacked him were defeated in a matter of moments. Therefore, the hero moved towards the remaining girls, frozen in horror. Approaching Clarissa, he gave her a hard slap. When she realized what had happened, her eyes widened in shock. Sam grabbed the other girl painfully by the hair. Feeling the cold blade of the knife on her skin, Camilla, with tears in her eyes and horror in her voice, asked what he was going to do. Ignoring her question, Sam slashed with the knife. Throughout the battle, the hero's gaze remained cold and never wavered. Clarissa, who had fallen to the ground, looked at her friend in horror, and Charlotte covered her eyes with her hands, refusing to look at what was happening. Camilla fell to the ground with tears in her eyes when she realized that her beautiful long locks had been cut off. Looking at Sam, she asked furiously how he could do this to her. He threw the cut hair on the ground and coldly said that it would only get in her way. Then he turned towards the exit and said that in a couple of days she would understand that a short haircut could save her life. Then he called out to Charlotte and Tim. The surprised girl asked what was happening. Immediately after they all got into the car, Sam headed to his base. On the way there, Tim tried to explain to his granddaughter that a great famine was coming soon, and that now they needed to worry about their survival and leave their old life in the past. Charlotte did not believe his words, and disapprovingly said that he should not listen to all sorts of swindlers and not let them pull the wool over his eyes. Our hero watched this picture through the mirror with a satisfied smile on his face. When their argument began to flare up with renewed vigor, he decided to intervene and said that the old man had not been deceived, and that the information about the famine had been received from him. The girl turned her gaze to the guy and asked who he was. Without slowing down for a moment, Sam told a little about himself. Having thanked him for his help earlier, Charlotte asked hesitantly if the famine would really begin. The hero grinned and replied that he made up this story to make it easier for her grandfather to believe what was happening. Hearing this, the girl relaxed and said that she had been right from the very beginning, and there would be no famine in peaceful times. However, when the hero said that instead of hunger, an apocalypse awaited them, she froze in shock. To prove his point, Sam asked her to go into her phone and look at the latest videos and news. She immediately fulfilled this request and went online. There were news reports almost everywhere that suddenly in a subway car a man started attacking other people and biting them. She scrolled through a few more videos. They all showed the same picture, people biting each other. From the sounds he heard, the hero realized that it had already begun, which he reported. The girl, shocked by what she saw, asked if this was really the beginning of the apocalypse. Looking at the sky, Sam replied that tomorrow would be the first day. A thick, toxic fog would cover several provinces, including their province. The effect of the fog would only appear on living beings. Most of the population mutates into zombies. The rest will be in mortal danger because of this, and after their death, they will also become zombies. The hero said that she was young, so she should have heard of such monsters. Charlotte replied that it was too hard to believe. Suddenly, a line of motionless cars appeared ahead of them. Sam swore under his breath when he realized they were stuck in traffic. Looking around, he saw that the emergency lane was also blocked. He stopped the car, hoping that the traffic jam would soon clear. Even though he knew they had a couple more days to get things under control, if zombies showed up anywhere nearby, they'd better hurry. Suddenly, another car moved into the emergency lane at high speed. Without slowing down, she tried to squeeze in front of our hero's car. He miraculously managed to brake in time to avoid a collision. He cursed again, unhappy that they had almost been cut off from the emergency lane, and that the driver had even forgotten to turn on his turn signals. He had no intention of giving up his seat, so he began to actively steer the wheel. He came very close to the slowly moving car in front of him, not giving anyone a chance to take his place. But even then, that car did not give up and started moving back. Sam cast a displeased glance out the side window. At this point, the cars were almost level with each other. A man looked out of his window and shouted something loudly and in a very displeased tone at Sam, but he ignored him. Tim, who was sitting behind him, worriedly said that they should let him pass and not create problems for themselves, because this man seemed rich. The hero calmly replied that if this man tried to get out of the car, he would immediately go flying. An hour later, the traffic jam finally cleared and they were able to move on. Suddenly, Charlotte shouted that that car was trying to cut them off. Immediately after her words, a familiar black Mercedes appeared next to them. Sam looked through the mirrors at the car with irritation in his eyes and shouted that he was asking for it. Suddenly, the Mercedes pulled ahead and, driving into the next lane, began to brake right in front of our heroes. Sam was extremely tense and tried his best to avoid an accident. If he were in the past, he would have spared him. But since the apocalypse is starting tomorrow, he no longer sees any point in forgiving such people. Therefore, when the Mercedes blocked his way once again, our hero decided to act differently. Without slowing down, he continued driving further. In order to save himself, the Mercedes driver had to quickly get out of the way due to sharp turns, and the car ended up on the side of the road. The man who came out from there rubbed his bruised head, after which he called the police and demanded that they look at the video from the cameras and find out everything about the owner of the car that cut him off. Watching the car drive away, he shouted after Sam that he was not to be trifled with. A couple of hours later, they arrived at our hero's base. When Tim and Charlotte got out of the car, they began to look around with excitement. They were very impressed with Sam's base. He turned slightly towards them and said that they should rest now, because difficult times would begin tomorrow. The next morning he woke up first, and after making himself some hot coffee, he walked over to the panoramic window, which offered a beautiful view of the green hills and the nearby town among them. Hearing Charlotte's approaching footsteps, he turned to her, who, stretching, said that she had not gotten enough sleep for a long time. The hero smiled at her and offered to take her on a tour of the surrounding area. A little later, Thomas showed his guests the base, telling them what was set up here and how. Stopping, he looked at Tim and Charlotte and sternly said that no one other than the three of them could be here without his permission. The surprised girl asked if this meant that if there were survivors who made it here, they would leave them to die. The hero ignored the question and said that they needed to inspect a couple more places. Leading them to the bridge, he explained that during the apocalypse, it is quite difficult to predict human behavior, and if you trust people with hidden motives, you can easily die yourself. The view that opened up to Tim and Charlotte from the bridge greatly surprised them. The hero explained that now in front of them there was a buffer zone, which would serve as a refuge for other survivors who would come here, but no one under any circumstances should get into the fortress itself. Then he turned around, saying that now he would show them the food warehouse and explain how to distribute everything there. A couple of minutes later, our heroes entered a spacious warehouse, completely filled with boxes. Walking a little deeper, Sam stopped and looked at his companions with a wary look. The next moment, he activated his mind's eye ability. Green smiley faces, signifying trust, appeared above Charlotte and Tim's heads. This was enough to test their intentions. Deactivating his ability, Sam said that weapons are the most important thing during the apocalypse, and then activated his ring. Several boxes of weapons immediately appeared in front of them, from which Charlotte and her grandfather chose the most suitable ones for themselves. When Sam said that they should always be in control and not dance to someone else's tune, Tim looked up at him and replied that they would not let him down, Suddenly, a system message appeared in front of our hero with a new task, in which Sam had to find and save his old partner, Robert. As soon as the hero began to think about where he should begin his search, a huge arrow appeared in the sky, pointing to a nearby city. Without a moment's hesitation, he rushed towards the exit, telling his confused guests as a parting word that they were not allowed to break the agreed-upon rules under any circumstances. Afterwards, he got into the car and headed in the direction indicated by the arrow. The place that the arrow was so actively pointing to was a club located in the city center, not far from our hero's base. A group of unsuspecting friends were relaxing at a karaoke bar, singing song after song. As soon as the next song ended, two guys went to the toilet, saying that they would be back soon. They walked down the corridor, completely absorbed in their conversation, and not noticing anything around them. So Robert accidentally bumped into a girl passing by, pushing her shoulder. He immediately stopped and apologized to her. The incident made the girl's companion lose his temper, and Robert's apologies did not calm him down at all. He stepped forward, knocked the guy down with a kick, and shouted that he should watch where he was going. Robert flew into the wall behind him, hitting it hard. His friend immediately sat down next to him and excitedly asked how he was. Then he looked at the guy who had attacked him, and with indignation in his voice, asked what he was doing. William irritably asked him, flexing his fists, who gave him permission to open his mouth at him. When he grabbed Ivan by the chest and lifted him up, Robert, afraid for his friend, jumped up from his seat and shouted that it was all his fault, and asked to let his friend go. At that very moment, a waiter came out into the corridor and immediately noticed the impending fight. Deciding that he should intervene, he rushed towards them to separate the fighting boys. Turning his attention to him, William shouted that he shouldn't go where he shouldn't. Ignoring his threats, the waiter motioned for Ivan and Robert to leave as quickly as possible. They, without wasting time, ran as far away from here as possible. Having found their reserved room, they ran in. Seeing his friends out of breath, one of the guys inside asked what happened to them. Ivan replied that they had encountered some bandit who had gotten drunk and started to cause trouble, and they were lucky that a passing waiter suddenly intervened, thanks to which they were able to escape. Ashton jumped up from his seat and angrily asked why they didn't beat up that bandit, then said that he would immediately call his guys, and they would quickly sort everything out. Robert smiled at him and said that there was no need to get so worked up, since there was only a little time left until graduation, so they should not create problems. It seemed that this was the end of it. But half an hour later, William burst into their room with a couple of his comrades and the waiter he had discarded. Their friends, who were not expecting their appearance, immediately became wary. William looked around carefully and, noticing familiar faces, pushed the waiter aside and shouted to his guys that it was them. Ivan and William were immediately surrounded, forced to sit on the floor with their hands behind their heads. The waiter could no longer do anything in this situation. He himself was barely able to stay on his feet. Suddenly, Ashton looked up at William with a confident expression and shouted that he only needed to make one call and they would all be dead. He grabbed the bottle standing next to him, and hitting Ashton's head with all his might, he shouted that he didn't allow anyone to talk. Robert's face immediately showed fear for his friend. At this point, our hero had already reached the club, at the entrance of which he parked his car. After reading the name of the building, the hero grinned, remembering that Robert was already finishing college. Afterwards, he headed inside. William's blow sent Ashton falling to the floor. Seeing the pool of blood spreading beneath him, Robert became even more scared. Meanwhile, William, with a satisfied smile, approached his girlfriend and, hugging her, asked if she felt better. She, looking at her manicure, boredly replied that she had no reason to do so, since another person had pushed her. Finding Robert with his eyes, he grabbed another bottle and headed towards him. At that moment, Ashton stood up and grabbed an ashtray from the table next to him, after which he rushed at William, but he didn't take even a couple of steps before he was stopped, grabbed by the arms. William swore under his breath, and deciding to change his target, he smashed another bottle on Ashton's head. The blow knocked the boy unconscious and he fell to the floor. At that moment, Robert and Ivan jumped to their feet and furiously rushed at William. Greg sat in his place, afraid to move, his whole body shaking with fear. The guys, carried away by the fight, did not notice how strange changes began to occur with the waiter standing to the side. Robert tried to strike his opponent again and again, but he always dodged, and when there were two of them, the fight became much more difficult, but he did not give up. At some point, the waiter stopped shuddering from pain. The veins on his neck and forehead bulged dangerously, and blood began to flow from his eyes. Growling furiously, he rushed into the thick of the fuss. Attacking one of the guys, he sank his teeth into his shoulder, holding him tightly by the head and arm. Because of the sharp pain that pierced his shoulder, he was unable to get rid of the waiter on his own, so he screamed, begging for someone to help him. This picture filled the frightened Greg with even more horror. Meanwhile, Carl's friend came to his aid and tried to pry the waiter away from him, but he was too strong. Suddenly the man let go of his victim and grabbed Milton's arm with all his might. Futile attempts to free himself brought no success, and the pressure of the maddened waiter forced Milton to fall to the floor. The clenched hand on the man's neck forced him to unclench his teeth. Sam easily lifted the struggling waiter up. Afterwards, the hero hit his head against the glass with all his might. Continuing to hold the man, the hero pointed at William and shouted for him to stop immediately. Milton rose to his feet and looked at Sam warily, trying to figure out who he was to be able to grab the crazed man with one hand. His silent question was voiced by an irritated William. But Sam didn't answer, instead turning his gaze to Robert and asking if he had been bitten. He replied that they didn't have time and asked warily what significance that had. Once again ignoring the unnecessary questions, Sam told the guy to go with him. Robert barely had time to get up from the floor when William stopped him, grabbing him by the shoulder and shouting that they were not finished yet. At that moment, one of his guys grabbed his head and said that he had a bad headache. William turned a worried look at him and asked if his cold had returned. The hero immediately realized that it was not a cold, but something much more terrible. It was hard not to notice the bite on the guy's shoulder. After listening to Carl's symptoms, he asked how long it had been going on. He answered with bewilderment in his voice that his cold had started yesterday, and asked why he was worried about it. The boy's answer confirmed Sam's fears that Carl was already infected, and the bite, which was so close to the head, only accelerated the process of conversion. Without saying a word, he headed towards the door, dragging the mutated waiter behind him. Opening the door, he threw the man inside, after which he immediately closed the door. There were persistent knocks on the other side, but the hero was calm. He knew that at an early stage, mutants are not so intelligent, so the man would not be able to open the door. Shaking off his palms, he turned towards the guys who didn't understand anything. Then he called out to Robert and, flexing his fists, asked whom of those present there he needed to remove. He asked in confusion what Sam was talking about and how he knew his name, and William's face distorted with anger. Unable to restrain himself, he rushed at the hero with his fists, shouting that he had better not get cocky. His fist never reached its target, because the next moment, taking a step forward, Sam covered the guy's face with his palm. Then, with one sharp movement, he hit his head on the table so hard that it shattered into pieces. Carl couldn't stay away and, shouting threats, ran towards Sam. The hero only needed to swing one of his fists to knock the guy rushing towards him off his feet. He fell to the floor and immediately lost consciousness, and white foam began to come out of his mouth. An agitated Milton ran to his friend, trying to bring him to his senses. Sam clenched his fist and shouted to everyone in the room that if anyone else wanted to try his fist, they were welcome to come over. Then he looked at Robert and told him to take his friends and wait for him outside the room. Taking the unconscious Ashton by the arms, Robert and Ivan hurried out of the room. Following them, William and his guys confidently headed towards the exit. Sam blocked their way, stopping at the entrance, which left William puzzled. Looking straight into William's eyes, the hero said that he would not let them leave this room after what he had done. Having said this, he pushed him back. The stunned guy fell to the floor and asked Sam in bewilderment what he was doing. But the hero ignored this question and left the room, slamming the door behind him. William jumped to his feet and began pounding furiously on the door, demanding that Sam open it immediately. Shouting empty threats, he didn't even suspect that something terrible was beginning behind his back. Carl turned into a zombie, completely losing his mind. Growling furiously, he rushed at William. Standing behind the door, Sam heard heartbreaking cries for help coming from the other side. When a security guard approached him and asked if he needed help, the hero asked the man to lock the door and not let anyone in, and also to call the police and the hospital, because a man there was having a rage attack. When the man heard about rabies, he was perplexed. Noticing his stupor, Sam shouted that they needed to act quickly. Having taken out the keys, the guard walked up to the door and closed it. The hero turned his attention to Robert's company and told them to follow him. Another guard approached and asked his partner what was going on, who hesitantly replied that something strange was happening inside. Afterwards, he told him what Sam had said about rabies, and asked if his partner had heard of anything similar. He turned around and ran to the other end of the corridor, saying that they urgently needed to check the cameras. What they saw there plunged the men into genuine horror. The maddened people devoured each other alive. Meanwhile, our heroes had already gone outside. Standing by their car, Sam was urging the rest of the guys on. Once everyone got into the car, they drove away from the club and headed to the hero's base. The tense silence in the car was broken by Robert, who was sitting next to Sam, thanking him for his help and asking who he was. The hero gave his name and said that he was hired to protect Robert, but he could not give details about the identity of the customer because it was classified information. Greg, sitting behind him, asked what kind of rabies flu this was, to which the hero replied that he should have seen everything that happened in that room. Ivan asked with hope in his voice if there was any treatment for this virus. The hero glanced at the guys sitting in the back seat through the mirror, and replied that the epidemic would only get worse over time, so the current world was doomed. Sudden screams from outside attracted the attention of everyone in the car. People started turning into zombies right in the middle of the street and attacking others. Sam said that for now it was only a local outbreak, but most people were already carriers, and very soon everything would get out of control. So if they wanted to survive, they had to listen to his commands. The guys had no choice but to accept the new reality and agree with it. At this moment, a system message appeared in front of our hero that the first part of the former partner's quest had been successfully completed, and he had been awarded 20 points as a reward. Sam mentally called up the system store, which immediately appeared in front of him. There he had access to a supply box, an apocalypse cultivator, a supply box, oil, sugar, protein, and a supply box with weapons. Sam noticed that the cultivator box was hanging in its place every time he called the store, so the hero would have to either buy it or spend points to upgrade the goods. Deciding that he would sort this out at the base, he waved his hand in front of him, dispelling the store window. Then he looked warily at the guys sitting in the car. Sam was very concerned about the issue of trust in the group. He knew very well that in his past life, Robert's entire dorm was taken over by zombies due to the betrayal of his close friend. So now our hero had to find out which of his 3 friends was the traitor. Throughout the day, Victoria was afraid to take a step outside the house, so now she called Pavel and excitedly asked when the supplies he had told her about would arrive. Her conversation was interrupted by a sudden loud knock on the door, which seriously frightened the girl. She slowly walked up to the door and whispered to Pavel that someone was knocking on her door, so she hung up. Then, fighting my fear, I looked through the peephole. As soon as she saw her friend's familiar face there, she relaxed and let Alexa inside. She told Victoria from the doorway that Uncle Luke had been taken from the first floor. The surprised girl asked where he had been taken, to which Alexa replied that she didn't know the details. She had just seen the police and an ambulance. Thinking over this information, Victoria thoughtfully said that now it was clear where all this noise was coming from. When Alexa asked whether Pavel had already brought the groceries, she replied that he had not yet. Hearing this, Alexa sighed and said with irritation that in this world you can't trust men, then asked Victoria to call Pavel and tell him that Sam had a lot of supplies. When she asked how she knew this, the girl replied that she had come to his new house and seen many trucks with food arriving there. From what was said, Victoria realized that Sam knew about the impending epidemic from the very beginning. Alexa shared her guesses, so she asked her to call Pavel. If he decided to sell all the stolen supplies, they would demand half of the money he received from him. By this time our heroes had already reached the base. When Sam parked, everyone got out of the car, looking around in surprise. Robert was shocked by what he saw and exclaimed in admiration that this place was simply incredible, like a real fortress. The hero grinned and said that this was the first time anyone had reacted like this. Charlotte and her grandfather came out into the street, guns in hand, and asked if everything was okay, and if Sam needed help. The hero nodded towards the 4 guys and replied that they shouldn't worry because the people standing behind him were new members of the team. After which he introduced Robert and his guys. Charlotte smiled and said that she was glad to meet them, and since Sam brought them personally, they could be trusted. The hero approached Tim and asked him to take a couple of guys with him, show them everything, and explain the rules of the stay. Suddenly Greg called out to the hero, attracting everyone's attention. He asked if they would also be given weapons, so that they too could help defend this place. The hero didn't like this question, and it was immediately reflected on his face. His eyebrows came together at the bridge of his nose, and his gaze became cold and wary. Ivan pulled his friend up and whispered to him that he shouldn't rush so much, but should try to gain trust. Sighing loudly, the hero replied that they didn't have to worry about it. They would be given weapons in a couple of days. Afterwards, he looked at the unconscious Ashton and said that it would be better to take him and examine him in the infirmary, because his wounds were serious. An hour later, Robert, Ivan, and Greg emerged from the shower that Sam had provided for them. Greg glanced at Ivan with displeasure and asked why he stopped him, in case they could have gotten the weapon right away. He was extremely unhappy with the situation they found themselves in, because they were now effectively under house arrest and needed weapons to protect themselves. Ivan looked at him seriously and said that the guy had saved them, and his fears were irrelevant here. Without saying anything, Greg turned his gaze to Robert and asked who Sam was and why he helped them. He told them that he knew no more than they did, that someone hired him to protect them. This answer did not calm Greg down at all. Frowning, he said that it could all be a deception. Just look at how they treated Ashton. The infirmary looks more like a prison. He was sure that Sam and his people were not helping them out of the kindness of their hearts. Perhaps they just wanted to use them for their own personal purposes. So the guy was going to strike first. Ivan tried to reason with him, saying that Greg was wrong and that they had no reason to betray their savior. But he stood his ground, saying that it was better to do this first than to wait for a knife in the back themselves. In any case, they should capture this base and manage it themselves. A wicked grin appeared on his face as he said that they could easily get rid of Sam and the old man, but keep the girl. Ivan and Robert were very surprised by such a sharp change in their friend's behavior and did not know what to answer. Noticing their reaction, Greg laughed and said that he was just joking and that they shouldn't be so scared. Hearing this, Robert sighed with relief and asked Greg not to frighten them with his crazy plans anymore. Ivan shared his opinion and said that if they wanted to kill them, they would have killed them long ago. As soon as the two of them turned around and headed towards the exit of the shower, Greg's friendly smile turned into a crooked grin. He decided that since his idea was not supported, he would act on his own. Having completed all of Sam's instructions, Charlotte and Tim returned to the hero. The old man told that Ashton was lying in the infirmary, and the rest had already settled in their place. All the doors and windows were closed, as Sam had asked. The hero smiled and thanked them for their work, after which he said that now they too could rest. He was about to let them go when he suddenly remembered one more thing. Sam asked them to keep an eye on not only Ashton, but the other guys as well, because he has this weird feeling that there is a traitor among them. Left alone, the hero turned off the light in the warehouse and went deeper. There he called the item shop. With the number of points he had, Sam bought all 3 boxes. The next moment, a bright flash of light appeared in front of him. Gradually, the outlines of objects became clearer, and when the glow disappeared, our hero saw in front of him a huge mountain of boxes and chests, along with gold coins. The next morning, 3 cars drove towards Sam's bunker. After an hour's journey, they stopped at the high gates protecting the shelter. The same guy who cut off Sam a couple of days ago carried out his threat. He found him and brought people with him to get even with our hero. Thanking his informant for his help, he hung up and ordered everyone to attack. Men armed with clubs pounded on the steel barrier in a futile attempt to break through the door. Suddenly, one of them stopped and informed an irritated Andre that they wouldn't be able to break through it. Andre was filled with rage and indignation. He did not understand at all who would install such doors in their home and why. Deciding to resort to extreme measures, he ordered his men to remove the boxes from the luggage. They contained numerous bottles of alcohol. Grabbing 1 bottle each, the men, with satisfied smiles on their faces, began to throw them over the impenetrable walls of the fence. As it crashed onto the ground, the contents instantly spilled out and burst into a bright flame. Thus, a real fire started at our hero's base. Charlotte and the other kids immediately ran out into the street, carrying fire extinguishers and water. Thanks to Sam's warning that something like this could happen at any moment, the girl reacted quickly enough. The hero himself, together with Tim, came out with weapons in their hands. He suggested that the old man climb up the tower to see what kind of guests had come to visit them. A couple of minutes later, they went upstairs, and the Mercedes parked nearby seemed very familiar to Tim. Digging through his memories, he remembered the man who constantly bothered them on the way to the base. He immediately rushed to tell Sam about this. One of the men caught movement out of the corner of his eye above and immediately looked up. He then informed Andre that their target was on the tower. He shouted with a voice full of indignation that if Sam did not come out to him, he would burn his house to the ground. In response, the hero calmly said that he was giving him only 5 minutes to gather his people and leave here. These words caused a lot of indignation among the men, and they all started shouting in one voice that he didn't yet know what their boss was capable of. Suddenly, the system informed Sam of a new mission, which was to eliminate the source of the threat to his base. An agitated Tim asked what they should do, and whether they should fire warning shots. To this, Sam replied that a warning shot would not dissuade these bandits. As he aimed his gun, he said that if they left them alive, these people would harm innocent people in the future. And without a drop of doubt, he pulled the trigger. With this lightning-fast shot, he cut off Andre's hand, and he didn't even have time to understand what had happened. However, the next moment, a sharp flash of pain pierced his body. Screaming in pain, the man fell to the ground, holding his bleeding limb with his hand. Looking at this picture, the hero said with a hint of regret that because of this peaceful life, his skills had become rusty, and he had missed. Realizing that it was better not to mess around with Sam, Andre and his men rushed to the cars. But Sam had no intention of letting these bandits get away, so he aimed his gun again. A continuous stream of bullets rained down on the fleeing men, piercing their vital organs. But Andre and 2 other men managed to take refuge in a truck and avoid being shot. Climbing inside, he shouted at the driver to step on the gas immediately. When Tim expressed concern that several had managed to survive and were now escaping by car, the hero reassured him, saying that he had taken the machine gun for just such a case. Immediately after this, he began shooting at the truck. When he ran out of ammunition, he reloaded his machine gun with quick and precise movements and continued firing. Tim was amazed by his skills. The way Sam did everything with ease and precision gave the impression that he had many years of experience behind him. Eventually, the hero achieved his goal, and the truck was disabled without even traveling 100 meters. Once Sam was done, he asked Tim to call the others to clean up downstairs. Suddenly, another idea came to his mind. Since it was the early stages of the apocalypse, he should make zombies out of these corpses so that Robert and Charlotte could practice. With these thoughts, he told Tim that he had another plan, and that there was no need to clean anything now. A couple of hours later, a couple more cars appeared on the road to our hero's base, approaching. While examining the area, Pavel asked if this was really the place. Alexa happily replied that their destination was at the next intersection. Victoria, who was sitting next to her, immediately noticed the change in her friend's behavior as soon as Pavel appeared, and she really didn't like it. A couple of minutes later, the high gates of the base appeared in front of them. Pavel stopped at a distance of 2 kilometers, saying that he would stay here, and Victoria would try to get inside, and then give him a signal. Getting out of the car, the girl called Alexa to come with her, which caused her great surprise and dissatisfaction with this idea. When she asked why she should go too, Victoria said that without her help, she would not find the right factory. Alexa explained to her that she just needed to go straight, and she would immediately see the right building. Victoria didn't want to give up so easily, and forcibly pulled her friend out of the car, saying that together they could handle it better. Thus the girls headed towards the base. Taking out his phone, Pavel dialed his guys and told them to be ready. As soon as his car starts moving, they will have to hit the gas too. Having finished the conversation, the man conveyed Pavel's words to everyone else. Following Victoria, Alexa asked with displeasure why she dragged her into this too. She said with a reproachful look that she would no longer fall for her petty tricks. But Alexa replied that Victoria had misunderstood everything. She had dressed up only to seduce that loser, Sam. Noticing something strange ahead, Victoria stopped with a puzzled expression on her face. There were corpses scattered everywhere. Frightened by such a terrible sight, the girls went further, carefully examining the bodies. To Alexa's offer to return, Victoria replied that they could not retreat so easily. She assumed that there had been a skirmish between 2 groups over Sam's supplies, and now they had to hope that there were at least some supplies left inside. Hearing their voices, Andre stirred slightly. The man, who had begun to turn into a zombie, began to slowly rise from his seat. Having reached the doors, the girls stopped near them, trying to open them, but all their attempts were in vain. Suddenly someone's voice called out to them from above. With her gun at the ready, Charlotte asked them who they were and how they found this place. Alexa replied that they were Sam's friends, and Victoria replied that she was his girlfriend. Without taking her suspicious gaze off them, Charlotte called out to Sam and told him that his girlfriend had arrived. Victoria's face showed irritation and discontent. She finally understood the reason for such drastic changes in Sam. He found himself another. The friend standing next to her told her not to show her discontent, because they had an important task that they could not fail. When Alexa asked if Pavel would definitely cope, since she had noticed Charlotte's crossbow, Victoria replied that his men had pistols, so there would be no problems. They just needed to open this door. The hero, who had climbed up, looked at the girls and asked in bewilderment what they were doing there. He activated the mind's eye almost immediately. Victoria didn't even try to hide her displeasure at the sight of him. And Alexa brilliantly played out the joy of meeting an old friend. His ability showed their ill will in the form of angry red faces above their heads. Smiling, Sam asked where Pavel was hiding and how many people he had brought with him. Hearing his question, the girls were taken aback. They could not reveal their plans in any way, so they did not understand how he found out. Suddenly, several bullets started to hit them, which the friends miraculously managed to dodge. Without a drop of pity in his eyes, the hero pointed a gun at the girls. Victoria looked at him and expressed her displeasure, but Alexa cut her off, saying that they shouldn't provoke him now if she didn't want to die. Hearing her words, the hero laughed and said that a simple death from a bullet would be too easy for them. Suddenly, strange sounds were heard behind the girls, which made them turn around. As soon as they did this, they froze in horror. A crowd of zombies was approaching them. Like a death sentence, Sam said that they would die at the hands of these monsters. Roaring furiously, the zombies moved towards their victims. To save their lives, the frightened girls ran away from here. Their desperate cries attracted the attention of Pavel, who was in the car. Ksenia, who was about to be overtaken by zombies, begged him for help with tears in her eyes. Seeing such a terrifying picture, the man cursed loudly. not understanding where all these monsters had appeared. Grabbing the radio, he shouted to his men to immediately turn around and get out of here. Immediately after that, without even waiting for the girls, he turned his car around and drove away from there. Clutching her purse in her hands, Victoria screamed that she didn't want to die like this, after which she threw it at Alexa, who was running ahead, the straps of the bag wrapped around the girl's leg. She tripped and fell to the ground. The zombies running after her rushed at her at once. They mercilessly devoured her alive. Crying in pain, Alexa screamed curses at her running friend. But Victoria no longer cared about her. The hero and Charlotte watched this scene from above. Turning her worried gaze to Sam, the girl asked if all the dead turned into zombies. He explained to her that this was only the beginning of the apocalypse. There were a lot of infections from other worlds in the air, and the dead, left on the street, very quickly became zombies. Some of the living only needed a slight injury for this. Having said all this, he turned around and told Charlotte to gather everyone for an urgent meeting. Half an hour later, everyone gathered in the conference room. Sam announced that they should stay inside the building for the next couple of days, with all doors and windows tightly closed, so they could reduce the risk of mutation. These words prompted Robert to ask what would happen to Ashton. Meanwhile, the guy in the hospital gradually mutated into a zombie. The poison spread throughout his body and had almost reached his brain. Meanwhile, the city was in chaos, with people only concerned about surviving. Sean watched the horror unfolding there from the window of his apartment. Looking at his worried wife, he said that he would have to go to the warehouse that night to pick up the remaining supplies there, so he warned her not to open the door to anyone while he was not home. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. Sean looked at the door expectantly for a few moments. Then he gestured to his wife to keep quiet. Armed with a club, he quietly approached the door. When he heard Douglas's familiar voice on the other side, he relaxed and opened the door. However, instead of greeting him, he was kicked in the stomach by Sean, causing him to immediately fall to the floor. The next moment, a group of people burst into the house. 2 men pinned Sean to the floor. Douglas was the last to enter. Sean looked at him and asked in bewilderment what he was doing and how he could betray their long-standing friendship. He grinned and said that there could be no talk of any friendship, since he constantly played the role of a lackey. Afterwards, deciding not to waste time, he demanded that Sean tell him the address of the warehouse and give him the keys. He clenched his teeth, not wanting to speak. Seeing this, a cheerful smile played across Douglas's face, and he said that Sean had better not resist. Immediately after these words, he approached his wife and painfully grabbed her by the hair. Their son, Paul, rushed at Douglas with tears in his eyes, screaming at him to let his mother go. In addition to his words, he bit the man on the hand. Cursing, he threw the boy away from him, slapping him in the face. As he watched the 2 thugs surround his son, Sean angrily shouted at them to leave his wife and child alone and attack him. In response, Douglas chuckled and said that the 2 would be fine as long as Sean cooperated with him. An hour later, left with no choice, Sean brought him to his warehouse. After looking dissatisfiedly at the remaining couple of boxes of food, Douglas asked in disbelief if that was all there was. Sean replied that the big client he brought to him had bought everything. His words made Douglas think of Sam. Suddenly, a sinister smile appeared on his face, and he said that if they could get their hands on this guy's supplies, they would have enough for the rest of their lives. Sean shook his head and advised not to bother him, because when he was delivering groceries to Sam, he accidentally saw a mountain of weapons. It was quite obvious that this guy had already started preparing for a disaster. Still smiling, Douglas told him that it was entirely his problem. Sean frowned and asked what he meant, to which he replied that he was trading the safety of his wife and son for Sam's supplies. The conditions he voiced were like a death sentence. Sean understood that it was too risky, but he could not refuse, because his family was at stake. Meanwhile, a completely unhappy situation has developed on the territory of our hero's base. Everyone gathered in Ashton's room. Because of his transformation into a zombie, they had to tie the guy's hands and feet so that he couldn't break free and bite someone. It was very difficult for Robert and Ivan to watch their friend's condition, which cannot be said about Greg. Turning his intense gaze to Ashton, he said that he needed to be killed. Hearing this, Sam looked at him reproachfully. Greg's friends weren't thrilled with his idea either. The guy folded his arms across his chest and explained that Ashton was already a dead man, and if he managed to escape, they would all be in danger. When Ivan tried to somehow reason with him, Sam said that to some extent Greg was right, because the transformed had very little chance. Then he pulled the blade out of its sheath. When the hero handed it to Greg, he was confused and asked what it meant. In a casual tone, Sam told him to kill the mutant. The boy looked doubtfully at the weapon handed to him, as if struggling with something inside himself. Approaching him, Sam reminded him that Greg had wanted the weapon all along, and now that he had it in his hands, he could save his friend from suffering and save others from danger. At this point, Robert intervened, intercepting the blade. You could tell from his face how hard it was for him to make the decision. Without taking his eyes off the trembling hand holding the blade, he said that he would do it himself. Suddenly, Sam grabbed the blade of the sword, stopping him. Afterwards, he asked if Robert was sure of his decision, because he could have deceived them. Looking into his eyes, he confidently replied that he trusted Sam completely. The hero smiled and said that in that case he would not stop him. Approaching the bed, Robert stood frozen over his friend's body, still struggling with the doubts in his head. Burning tears appeared in his eyes, and he raised his blade to strike. He was determined to finish it all with one blow, but the blade froze a few centimeters away, never reaching its target. At the last moment, Sam intercepted Robert's hand, preventing him from doing what he had planned. Robert looked at him blankly and asked what he was doing. Looking at the system's message about the appearance of a rare mutant, the hero said that everyone needs to get out of here. They have a rather specific situation, and Ashton will still have a use, so there is no reason to kill him yet. After listening to him, everyone left the room, closing the door behind them. Left alone with the mutant, Sam approached him closer. Ashton struggled to break free and attack, but the restraining straps held tight. So, without any fear, the hero stood over him and said that he would have one task for him. Meanwhile, another car was racing at full speed towards the base. The driver lost control and crashed into a pole. Sean got out of the car, rubbed his bruised head and said with displeasure that he was having catastrophic bad luck today. Finding Sam's base building with his eyes, he headed there, completely unaware of the danger approaching him from behind. It was only when the zombie lunged at him with a furious growl that Sean noticed it. But it was too late. He didn't have time to dodge, and the zombie grabbed his hand. Through the pain, the man pulled his hand out of its mouth, pushing the monster away from himself. Then he rushed back to his car. He picked up the crowbar that was lying in the back seat. Then he hit the zombie on the head with all his might, shouting for him to leave him alone. Sean struck him mercilessly, blow after blow. When he stopped moving, the heavily breathing man stopped. Deciding that he shouldn't linger here any longer, he moved on. Zombies were still circling around the car abandoned by the fence. Sam walked outside through the other door and looked around for danger. Following him, all the others came out with weapons in their hands. Once outside, Charlotte complained to Sam that the new gear was too uncomfortable to move in. The hero explained that it would be impossible to negotiate with zombies. They were much stronger than ordinary people and more dangerous, and they had little experience in battles, so they needed this equipment to avoid getting injured. Having reached the corner, the hero stopped because he noticed a zombie ahead. He informed his team about this and told them to all get ready. Hearing their voices, the zombie turned sharply towards them. Sam looked back at those standing behind him and shouted for everyone to act as he had taught them and remember to keep a safe distance. When the zombie jumped on him, the hero jumped to the side. After he shouted that the chance would appear when the zombie missed, you need to act quickly and aim at the temple or the back of the neck. Ivan showed the greatest determination. Approaching the zombie, he swung his sword to strike. His blow hit the monster right in the head, on the forehead, but it did not cause him any harm. The guy jumped back, holding his hand, which received the recoil from the blow. Sam, standing to the side, explained that the zombie is very strong. Such a blow can only damage your hand. Grabbing the blade of Ivan's sword with his palms, the zombie pressed him against the wall. While the monster was trying to gnaw through the blade, Ivan called out to his comrades, asking for someone to help him. Sam praised his defensive stance and asked Robert to help his friend. The guy immediately approached the zombie with a bat at the ready, taking aim. Then he delivered a precise blow to the monster's neck. The hero watched as the three guys beat up the zombies and periodically gave them advice, while another enemy approached them. Having completed his first goal, Robert looked towards Sam with an inspired look in his eyes and asked how they had done. Not noticing the monster behind him, the hero replied with a smile that everything was wonderful. Fear crossed Robert's face and he leaned forward, shouting a warning of danger. At this point, the zombie was almost on top of Sam, aiming for his shoulder. Suddenly, the hero's hand grabbed his head and prevented him from reaching his goal. Without even glancing towards the monster he was holding, he shouted to his team members not to relax until they had checked their surroundings for danger. The boys, frozen in surprise, were amazed by his abilities. Sean had already managed to get almost right up to the base. Noticing the zombies circling near the entrance, he cursed. He could only hope that these monsters had not yet managed to get inside. Otherwise, he simply would not be able to return alive. The man also saw a jeep parked nearby, and then heard Sam's familiar voice. Having emerged from his hiding place, he moved cautiously towards the car. Once he had successfully reached her, he hid there and quietly peeked out from his new hiding place to see what was going on there. Sean had no idea about the danger lurking beneath the car. Alexa, mutated into a zombie, crawled out. Then, With one sharp movement, she grabbed the man's trouser leg. Frightened, he fell to the ground. As soon as he came face to face with the monster, he was frozen with horror. With a furious roar, Alexa rushed at her victim. As she loomed over Sean, he was already prepared for his death. However, at the last moment they came to his aid. Sam shot off the zombie's head. The man immediately threw off the rest of his body. The hero recognized him and, lowering his weapon, asked what Sean was doing here. He got to his feet and headed towards him, saying that he was very glad that Sam had managed to survive. The hero couldn't help but notice the man's bitten hand. So when Sean approached him, Sam pointed a gun at him and told him he was infected. Putting his hands in front of him, the man asked the guy not to kill him, because he needed to tell him something important. Sam said he could talk, but he shouldn't come any closer. With regret on his face, Sean admitted that he himself knew about his infection, and that he didn't have much time left. After looking up, he shouted that Douglas had kidnapped his wife and child and wanted to use him to steal all of Sam's supplies. Not a single emotion flashed across the hero's face as he listened to Sean. He begged him to help his wife and child, at least in gratitude for the supplies he had collected for him. The hero frowned slightly when he heard this. He understood that Sean did all this only for his own benefit, but his help was really useful to him. Thinking about this, he turned his gaze to the guys standing a little further away. There was enough space at his base for everyone, and the balance is now heavily skewed towards men. When a window with a system task appeared in front of him, Sam's interest increased significantly. He needed to save a woman with a child, and in the process of doing this, clean up the streets around the base. Turning his gaze to Sean, he told him not to worry. His wife and child would be safe. As soon as he heard this, filled with gratitude, the man immediately fell to his knees and said that in this life, he would not have time to repay the mercy shown to him, so he would definitely become a faithful servant in the next. Then he sat down on his knees and asked Sam to do it. When the hero asked him what he meant, Sean said he didn't want to turn into a monster, so he asked to kill him now. The hero thought for a moment, not rushing to do anything. Suddenly he called out to Charlotte and asked her to bring the bicycle from the warehouse here. Then he looked at Sean again and told him to go as far away as possible and, avoiding people, find a safe, isolated place. The man asked Sam, with a confused voice, why he was doing this, to which he replied that he didn't need to know, but just to do as he was told. He sighed and thanked the hero. As soon as the bike was brought to him, he got on it and, as Sam said, rode as far as he could. The transformation into a zombie had already begun, but he stubbornly continued to move forward. Only thoughts of his wife and son motivated him not to give up. Meanwhile, Sam and his guys had already finished clearing out the zombies around the base. He dragged a canister and poured gasoline onto the zombies piled up in a mountain. Afterwards, they set them on fire. The message that appeared from the system stated that the cleanup task had been completed. Looking at it, Sam told the guys that by splitting into groups of 2 or 3 people, they would be able to deal with the lone zombies. He also warned that they were not yet ready to face a group or horde of zombies, so if such a danger appeared, they should not rush into trouble. Having said this, he turned around and asked everyone to follow him. Sometime later they stopped at the entrance to one of the warehouses. Sam called out to Tim and asked the old man to come to him. Handing him the key, he said that in front of them was a room with weapons, and since he would be going into the city that night, the safety of the shelter was in Tim's hands. The old man asked worriedly if Sam was going to go there alone. Robert and Ivan, who heard this conversation, said with enthusiasm in their eyes that they were ready to go with him. But the hero replied that they would only get in his way, so he would go alone. Sighing, Tim wished him good luck. Taking his weapon with him, our Sam got into his car, where he called a convenience store. After his last purchase, it still hadn't been updated and was empty, and to update the goods the hero needed to spend 2 points. He didn't really have a choice, so he sacrificed a couple of points and pressed the refresh button. A few moments later, 3 new items appeared in front of him. A crate of dark technology, a crate of equipment, and a crate of armed deterrents. The hero sighed in disappointment when he saw that the new product upgrade would cost him 2 points more, so he decided that he should approach this issue more carefully. After some thought, the hero chose the technology box. The car was instantly filled with a bright flash of light. A new message appeared in front of our hero, which said that he had received a serum that increased his physical strength by 5 points. Because of the bright light emanating from it, the hero had to cover his eyes with his hand. Suddenly, the light disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared, and a serum appeared in Sam's palm. He decided to use it right away, so he rolled up the sleeve on his left arm and injected himself with the contents of the syringe. Such a sharp jump in strength could not pass without pain, but it was a necessary step to become stronger. Now our hero's strength had reached 13 points, which exceeded the normal human ability by 160%. Meanwhile, hiding in the nursery, Anna tried to calm her frightened son. Suddenly the door to the room opened and Douglas entered, accompanied by another man. Jumping to her feet, Anna asked with fear in her voice why they had come. Instead of answering, Douglas grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him, saying that as long as Sean kept his end of the deal, they would have some fun. Immediately after this, he tore her blouse, which greatly frightened Anna. She begged the men to let her go, but they continued to tear her clothes off with smiles on their faces. Little Paul tried to stop one of them, but he didn't have enough strength to do it. Carried away, the men did not notice someone else entering the room. Smith asked irritably what they were doing there to make so much noise. Jacob looked up at him and offered him to join them, to which he replied with displeasure that they had not finished the task yet, and did not have time for something like that. Now it was Jacob's turn to frown. He asked in confusion what the problem was, since this was not the first time this had happened. With the same irritation, Smith asked what they would do if the woman couldn't take it anymore and committed suicide. Then Sean would have nothing to lose, and they would have to fight to the death. So he suggested putting it off for a while, until they dealt with Sean. After letting go of Anna, Douglas and Jacob headed towards the exit, promising that they would definitely return. Anna, with tears in her eyes, hugged her son to her, trying to calm him down. Our hero arrived in the city as planned, closer to night. During the trip, he managed to notice that thanks to the increased strength points, his reaction and body control had improved significantly. He drove around all the cars standing in his path, practically without even slowing down. Approaching the center, he stopped and got out of the car. Sam figured the car might attract too much attention there, so it would be best to continue on foot. Suddenly, he heard a roar coming from behind him. Turning around, the hero saw two zombies rushing towards him. When the first zombie rushed at him, he deftly dodged. The next moment, Sam attacked him. Then he threw it towards the second zombie, knocking it off its feet. The time he gained was enough for him to summon his weapon. Immediately after that, he rushed at full speed towards the monsters. With one swing, the hero cut off the heads of two zombies at once. Thanks to this skirmish, he was able to verify that he was now completely superior to the current zombies in strength and reflexes. In addition, his senses also began to work better. He could hear people at great distances. Sam discovered that someone needed help 800 meters away. Meanwhile, a crowd of zombies tried to break into the store. The people inside barricaded the entrance with cabinets. The boy who was helping to move the cabinets looked at his father with tears in his eyes and asked if they were all going to die here. He replied that no one would be able to fit in here, and in the worst case, they would soon meet their mother. These words made Roman cry even harder. The cop supervising the process looked at Dmitri with displeasure and said that he should watch his words better, because the situation was already difficult. Chris didn't want to think about them all actually dying like this. Suddenly there was a crash outside, and the next moment a spray of blood hit the glass. Immediately after this, a zombie with a bullet in the head appeared in the window. Taken by surprise, Roman slipped on level ground and fell. As the zombie slid down the glass to the ground, Chris told Dmitri to clear everything away from the entrance with Roman. They immediately set to work, clearing the blocked entrance back out. As soon as the passage was clear, Chris was the first to look outside, looking around. After making sure there was no danger, they came out of their hiding place, wondering who had finished off the zombies lying around. Suddenly Roman shouted that it was all done by zombie mutants. The boy's father glanced at him and asked what mutants he was talking about. Roman explained that they were ordinary zombies that had become stronger and faster. While they were distracted by conversation, Chris remained alert and ready to attack at any moment. Calling out to Dmitri and Roman, he said with displeasure that they should concentrate and monitor the situation if they did not want to be eaten by zombies. So, looking around carefully, they moved towards the nearest shelter. When he reached the turn, Chris stopped and signaled for others to remain in their places. Meanwhile, our hero dealt with the last couple of zombies, successfully completing the task of saving the group of people standing behind him. Roman looked out from around the corner and said with complete confidence in his voice that the man in front of them was most likely a mutant. Chris shook his head and said he looked more like a survivor. Sam heard them perfectly well, so he laughed, and turning slightly towards them, said that Roman needed to read less science fiction, while mutants would not be so easy to meet. Seeing that our hero was an ordinary person, Chris was very happy and went out to him. Still holding his gun at the ready, the man invited Sam to join him in the group, since it was dangerous to wander alone now. The hero was in no hurry to accept the invitation. Instead, he asked who they were and how many people were there. Looking around, Chris replied that a small group of civilians were hiding not far from here, and they went out for supplies. When he heard a street that sounded familiar, Sam asked if there was a mansion there, and Dmitri confirmed his guess, saying that it was across the street from their hideout. Putting his hand on his shoulder, the man said that they had weapons and some experience fighting these monsters, so Sam didn't have to worry. They would be able to protect him. The hero smiled and thanked them for their concern, agreeing to their proposal. Thus, with a renewed lineup, they continued on their way. Dimitri glanced sideways at Sam and asked if, since he was asking about Kay's mansion, he must want to meet someone important there. When the hero answered yes, the man stopped and asked who exactly, a relative or a girl. He explained that the old world had long since ended, and their chances of survival were very small, so he advised the hero to prepare for the worst. Chris echoed his sentiments, angrily saying that even if they weren't killed by zombies, they could have run into those animals. Sam asked, confused, what was going on. The man explained that this was a group of bandits who had settled in the east of the city, and they were killing any survivors they encountered along the way. He had already encountered them once, and that time he lost almost all of his comrades. Changing the subject, Chris said that Sam just needed to be careful around the other survivors. Suddenly Roman shouted to him that there were zombies ahead. Chris immediately turned around, coming face to face with the threat. 2 shots to the head were enough to kill him. The man was very unhappy with what had happened, and swore quietly. After which he explained that the sound of gunshots attracted the attention of other zombies, and they would now come here. He tried to find a way out of the situation, frantically looking around. Suddenly he noticed a bus standing a little further away. Shouting to everyone, he ran towards the temporary shelter. The hero smiled, mentally awarding Chris 70 points for such an urgent solution to the problem. Its downside was that there was no possibility of retreat afterwards. Everyone had already climbed into the bus, except for Sam, who had fallen behind. Chris was standing at the entrance, urging the guy on. In a matter of moments, our hero reached the bus. Immediately after this, Chris closed the door, shouting for everyone to check the seats to make sure there was no one inside. Roman looked out the window and reported that zombies had gathered around the bus. Chris swore in displeasure at the sight of a whole horde of enemies. The zombies reached for the windows and doors of the bus, trying to break inside. Chris tried his best to hold the door, but the pressure from the zombies was stronger. Suddenly Sam came to his aid. Touching the door with one hand, he slammed it shut, as if he felt no resistance from the zombie, which greatly surprised the policeman. He was shocked by the inhuman strength of our hero. Sam turned his gaze to the man and said that he would hold the door, so everyone else should break the windows and fight off the zombies. Deciding not to ask any unnecessary questions, Chris ran to fulfill his request. A few moments later, all the windows of the bus were smashed. The zombies immediately reached out to them. Looking out of one of the broken windows, Dimitri plunged an iron rod into the zombie's head. The man was insured by his son and Olivia. Chris stood behind him with a gun. The man clicked his tongue in displeasure, saying that he didn't have enough bullets. When Sam called out to him, he immediately turned around. Taking a crossbow from his ring, he handed it to Chris. When the man asked where he got it from, he replied that he simply picked it up on the street, after which he threw the weapon to the puzzled cop. Thanks to this, the process of destroying zombies went much faster. Sometime later the zombies were dealt with and our heroes were able to get outside. Inspired by what had happened, Roman shouted that they were the children of the fate of the apocalypse, since the critical situation had already ended in their favor twice. While warming up, Sam advised the others to stay vigilant so as not to make such a stupid mistake again. Meanwhile, the guys at the base were deciding who would be on duty today. Greg put forward his candidacy. Ivan, with a grin on his face, nudged him in the side and asked where he got such enthusiasm from. He shouted with irritation that he should stop talking nonsense and not dare to interfere in his affairs. He walked away from him with a disappointed expression on his face, not understanding why he was reacting so sharply to such questions. Tim didn't see anything wrong with Greg's proposal, so he said that since he volunteered, so be it, and the rest of them should go to bed. So Greg went to the tower. After sitting there for about 2 hours, he decided that this should have been enough for everyone to fall asleep. With these thoughts, he stood up and headed downstairs. He needed to have time to sort everything out before Sam returned. Tim had long since fallen asleep in his bed, placing the key entrusted to him next to him. Suddenly the door to his room opened quietly. Greg peered inside cautiously, checking to see if the old man was asleep. He tiptoed towards his bed. Stopping nearby, he carefully reached for the key. At that moment, Tim woke up and opened his eyes. He sat up abruptly in bed and asked in bewilderment who Greg was doing here. The only thing Greg could think of in this situation was to punch the old man in the temple. Afterwards, amid angry cries, he ran out of his room with the key in his hands. The noise brought everyone else out of their rooms. Holding his head, Tim told everyone that Greg had stolen the key to the armory and escaped. Realizing the catastrophic nature of the situation, all three immediately rushed after the traitor. He ran into the corridor, littered with all sorts of junk. As soon as he heard approaching footsteps, he knocked over a nearby ladder and boxes. The guys following him could not continue the chase because of an obstacle that appeared on the way. Meanwhile, Greg had already reached the infirmary. Smiling unkindly, he quietly said that he would go to the end. Opening the door, the guy resolutely entered the room. After a moment's hesitation, he moved closer to Ashton and reached for the restraining straps. When the zombie suddenly released one of his hands and reached out to him, a frightened Greg jumped back. He was sure that Ashton was firmly attached, so he didn't expect this at all. Suddenly a new idea popped into his head, and he cast a sly glance at the door, thinking that this, on the contrary, would save him time. When our heroes reached the infirmary by a roundabout route, they saw Ashton freed. Robert and the others immediately stopped a couple of meters away from him. Charlotte looked at her grandfather and asked what they should do since all the weapons were in the armory. He replied that they would have to try and lock Ashton back in. Calling out to the boys, he told them to remember and use the methods Sam had taught them, but under no circumstances to allow themselves to be bitten. Thus, the heroes slowly approached the zombie standing with its back to them. Having waited for the right moment, Robert was the first to rush into the attack. He grabbed Ashton around the neck, holding him back with all his might. Meanwhile, Ivan and Charlotte grabbed his arms from both sides. Ashton opened the doors to the infirmary and shouted for them to carefully lead Ashton in. With their combined efforts, they managed to push him in there. Afterwards, Robert locked the door. Tim watched the zombies through the window with apprehension. He wasn't the only one who had the strange feeling that they had managed it suspiciously easily. Remembering their main problem, the old man cursed with displeasure. Because they had wasted too much time here, Greg could have already managed to get to the weapon. Suddenly, Greg came around the corner with a satisfied smile, saying that they were too slow. However, the smile quickly turned into irritation on his face, and he said that he could only find a pitiful semblance of a weapon in that warehouse. Pointing it at Tim, Greg said that once he dealt with them, he would definitely find another weapon. Robert stepped forward, bewildered, asking what he was doing, since Sam had saved and helped them. To this, Greg replied that a great favor could one day become a great burden. Even though he saved them once, it did not mean that they became his slaves for the rest of their lives. Tim said with disapproval that some people are simply ungrateful by nature and cannot be taught anything. Ashton also watched this scene from the infirmary window. His face was distorted with rage. Holding the key in his palm, he headed towards the door. Meanwhile, Sam and the others had already reached the desired area. After pointing him in the right direction to the mansion, Chris warned Sam to be careful. He also added that as soon as the hero finished searching, he should come to their shelter in the garden in the 8th building, but not use the main entrance. Sam thanked the men and said goodbye, moving on. When Dmitri asked why Chris didn't offer him his help, he replied that they didn't know what the current situation was near the mansion, and that there was a high probability that they could simply be finished off by a horde of zombies. Shaking his head, the man said that he tried to warn the boy about the danger, but he did not listen, although he was sorry to lose a man with such excellent skills, but he could not do anything. Douglas's patience was wearing thin with each passing hour, and he couldn't help but begin to suspect that Sean had simply dropped everything and run away. The rest of us are also getting pretty fed up with this waiting. The men's irritation was further increased by the fact that they could not reach Anna, due to the possible fact of her subsequent suicide. All this time the woman sat, shedding tears and hugging her son to herself. She still hoped that her husband would soon return, and this would all end. When Smith was already tired of listening to his partner's discontent, he, without taking his eyes off the window, told them to do whatever they wanted, just be careful, and not kill Anna. Suddenly something outside caught his attention. He missed the moment when all the zombies outside were killed. Worried by this, Smith went out onto the landing. He shouted, asking if there was anyone there. Instead of answering, he was attacked. In literally an instant his neck was cut. The head fell to the floor and blood gushed from the neck like a fountain. Meanwhile, Anna tried to force the men who had entered the room to leave. Unbuckling his belt, Jacob said with a smirk on his face that she should understand why they came and would not leave so easily. He grabbed Paul by the scruff of the neck and dragged him away. Anna asked what they were doing and demanded that they let the child go. In response to this, she was given a noticeable slap in the face. Afterwards, Jacob threw the boy aside, saying that they only needed her. Standing up, he cried out with tears in his eyes that he would protect his mother at any cost. Having deprived him of the opportunity to get rid of the extra noise in his face, the boy was simply thrown out of the room, slamming the door. Undeterred, Paul began to shout that as soon as his father returned home, he would not leave any of them unpunished. At that moment, the front door opened and a headless corpse fell out. This picture scared the boy to death. When a silhouette appeared in the doorway, Paul asked with horror in his voice who was there. Sam came in and asked the child if he was Sean's son. Paul, trembling with fear, could not utter a word. Anna, who was in the next room, also cowered in fear. Douglas, enraged, punched her in the face, demanding that she scream louder and not ruin all their fun. Jacob came up to her, grabbed Anna by the hair and said that since she decided to keep quiet, he would be the first. Suddenly, the door to the room swung open. The man closest to her didn't have time to say a word before his neck was instantly cut. Noticing his partner's inaction, Douglas looked back and told him to throw the kid out and calm him down. When the man's body fell dead to the floor, separated from his head, everyone froze in shock. Douglas cursed, completely confused about what the hell had happened here. Suddenly he felt someone's hand grasp his head. With one movement, Sam threw him into the wall. The powerful blow to the back provided the man with several severe, fatal fractures. Adjusting his pants, Jacob looked at Sam with fear, asking who he was. He didn't hear an answer to his question. The next moment he was hit in the face with a kick. Meanwhile, back at the base, Greg threatened that if they didn't return to their rooms, they would be shot. Looking at those standing behind him, Tim whispered that they should not resist and go into the rooms. Charlotte wanted to object to her grandfather, but he reminded them that, unlike Greg, they were completely unarmed, so they needed to go back, and he would think of something. Hearing his words, Greg chuckled and said that he wouldn't have to come up with anything if he made a couple of corpses in order to establish his power here. And he chose Tim as his first victim. Charlotte leaned forward in alarm, and Robert once again tried to appeal to his former comrade's common sense. Suddenly, strange sounds were heard from the other side of the infirmary door. The next moment the handle made a couple of turns, opening the lock. When the door opened and Sean stood before them, everyone froze in shock and horror. Somehow he managed to open the door himself using the key. Greg couldn't move as he watched the zombie approach him. Ashton's face was twisted with anger. Pointing his gun at him, Greg shouted that he couldn't leave such a threat at his side, so he pulled the trigger, aiming at the monster's head. But when the shot didn't follow, the guy looked at the weapon in bewilderment, not understanding what was going on. At that moment, Ashton rushed at him with a roar. He tore the guy who was trying to resist apart with his bare hands. A couple of minutes later, once he was finished, Ashton, covered in someone else's blood, stood up, and without paying any attention to those standing nearby, headed back towards the infirmary. He dragged Greg's body along with him. The hero watched him go with surprised looks, still not understanding what had happened and why the zombie hadn't touched them. Suddenly Ashton stopped. The heroes standing nearby immediately tensed up and held their breath, praying that the zombie would not decide to attack them. Instead, Ashton reached into the door and pulled out the key. Then, without turning around, he threw it to the side. The shocked heroes watched as the key landed a meter away from them. At that very moment, the door to the infirmary slammed shut from the other side. After exchanging glances, everyone silently looked at the door, trying to comprehend what had just happened.